Whoa. Come on, hold your horses. This is not an AMD bash fest. I've been down that road before and it's not pretty. This is actually quite the opposite. So fanboys, please hold your dislikes. But let's keep it real. Whenever I'm asked what CPU to buy for a mid-range PC build, somewhere in usually the $800 range, I end up recommending something from AMD. It's almost inevitable. Very rarely do I recommend Intel for anything desktop related, which is great from one point of view and terrible from another. I mean, where's the competition? Let's talk about the future. Stay with me. Thermal Grizzly's Carbonite pads offer peace of mind, ease of installation, and industry standard performance in a market crowded with mediocre thermal compounds. Our own testing confirms they conduct heat appropriately and form a sufficient bond with the die or IHS and cooler. They're much cleaner than paste solutions and can be reused as many times as you'd like. They're also extremely consistent, that's my favorite part, which is why we use them for CPU cooler testing. Check them out via the link below. Ah yes, the Ryzen 5 3600. Killer value in this box, and I'm not surprised. AMD's been tugging on the value chain in the CPU space for years. Heck, even FX and Athlon chips were cheaper most of the time than Blue Team counterparts. But at this point, IPC scales have tipped. Single core performance has practically leveled. The only advantage Intel really has at this point is the higher frequency. And Infinity Fabric latencies have been mitigated by fast, affordable DDR4, which is something we weren't experiencing a few years ago with memory price fixing. So the conditions are favorable for Team Red. They have been for quite some time. Why buy a 6-core, 6-thread chip from Intel, like this i5 8400, when you could have twice the threads and guaranteed overclocking support for the same price in the R5 3600? It's a no-brainer, almost. We're talking no more than maybe a 10% frame rate delta between CPUs. In fact, most of the time those margins are much smaller, so there's really not much of a case for the i5 unless you can find it for, I'd say around 60 to 80 bucks cheaper than the R5 counterpart. And this is currently priced at around 150 bucks. Intel's close, but you also have, cheaper Zen Plus chips to consider, like the Ryzen 5 2600, and that thing is going for like 120 bucks. I'd buy that over this for 150 any day. And that's also taking into account the fact that Zen Plus IPC is lower than this. And to be quite frank, raw computational power is definitely a Team Red plus at this point for programs capable of leveraging every thread, which is why the AMD Core push is such a big deal. Another reason the 3600 seems so appealing at this point is the fact that most of today's games effectively utilize around 6 hyper-threaded cores. Sure, it's easy to point out the few exceptions out there. You could say Battlefield and even Modern Warfare are probably games that will utilize as many threads as you throw at them, up to a point that's much higher than 6 or 12. But for the most part, you'll find this to be the case. Around 6 hyper-threaded cores is a sweet spot, or multi-threaded, I should say, for AMD. It just happens to be that way. In fact, a few years ago, 4 cores, debatably 4 multi-threaded cores, was the sweet spot. And you can largely thank the core count push again from AMD for making chips like the 3600 so attainable at $200 brand new. Sometimes slightly less than that. On Newegg just recently, I saw it going for about 175 bucks. Older generations, by the way, creeping into $100 territory, like the 2600 I just mentioned, which is an even better deal in my book. But why then have you titled this video what you have, Greg? What's the point? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to hate on AMD? My response, again, absolutely not. I've tried my best to responsibly praise AMD, at least up to this point in the video. And more specifically, the Ryzen 5 3600 deserves quite a bit of praise for being such an incredible value chip. Rather, I've titled this video what I have because I'm more or less disappointed with the competition, or I guess I should say lack thereof, that Intel's created. It's more like a void. I mean, the i5 9400, it comes close, but the company's refusal to implement hyper-threading where it's needed has allowed AMD to withhold a serious advantage in the competitive price segment that is the $100 to $200 range. And maybe Intel's okay with that, but it doesn't mean that I am, right? Team Blue's just more expensive. Plain and simple, objectively speaking. But to that point, I've heard rumors of a Comet Lake refresh, of sorts, I guess, that supposedly addresses some of these issues. So apparently we're gonna see Core i5s with hyper-threading. I think that's the first time i5s have ever been hyper-threaded. And Core i9s with, 10 cores now, would certainly narrow a few gaps, but the degree of competitiveness is ultimately gonna come down to price. If Intel remains expensive, for lack of a better word, probably because there isn't a better word, then I expect the story to remain much the same, which would be awfully disappointing. And I mean, come on, we've been on the same freaking architecture for the past, back to Skylake. So Skylake, KB Lake, then we have Coffee Lake Plus, Coffee Lake Plus Plus, Coffee Lake Plus Plus Plus. It's getting ridiculous. This is 14 nanometer plus 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 plus. I can't keep up. And the least you could do is offset some of our frustrations by adjusting prices to better reflect competitive offerings across the aisle. Otherwise, you're positioning yourself as a premium product just for the heck of it. And that might work for a company like Apple, but Intel's in a different market. They make things that go into other things. And that isn't always enough to keep people satisfied on the surface. So I am extremely frustrated with the fact that I've almost been exclusively recommending AMD for budget-conscious buyers. I mean, it isn't always sunshine and rainbows for Team Blue, if we're being honest. And while many are willing to praise AMD for their innovation and spearheaded price competitiveness, we need to keep in mind the fact that AMD is a company. Advanced Micro Devices is like any other corporation in a capitalistic environment. They care about profits and they care about their shareholders. Right, Nate?
Right.
Nate says right, so you know it's right. Don't be mistaken. At the end of the day, the core values that drive companies like Intel are the same values that drive companies like AMD. I mean, they're in the same space. They're direct competitors with each other, so what do you expect? They may present different exterior philosophies, right? But they're greedy. They want to grow. Every company wants to do that. And in that way, you can't really say that it's a bad thing. It's just what they do, what they'll resort to in order to grow that could potentially be bad. But we shouldn't let it dilute our opinions down to sheer fanboyism. Trust me, we don't want Intel to fail. Not that they ever would. In fact, they are far from that, and they're blowing AMD away in a few other categories, just maybe not the desktop space as much as we might think. At the end of the day, we just need competition, and it's why I'm, again, so frustrated recommending only Ryzen to so many people. It just gets old, and I'm sure it's getting old to all of you as well, seeing us recommend the same stuff over and over, because it's really, I mean, Ryzen is the only viable option for a lot of budget builders out there, and it's great, again, from one perspective, but it sucks from another. I want diversification. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Click on that like button if you like this video, consider subscribing, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for chatting with me. My name's Greg. Thanks for learning with me and learning with Nate.